Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Totalbiscuit. Welcome to another update for Tribes Ascend, and this is for the latest patch by the name of Staying Alive, which is a weird reference to disco. Of course, we're talking about this fellow right here, the Brute, and his famous disco grenades. The funny thing about the name of the update is it doesn't actually make any other sense apart from that, because none of the upgrades really help the Brute to actually stay alive. So let's have a look at what it actually offers. We'll have a look at the other features of the patch and then show you some gameplay with these new weapons. Alright, heading over to the Brute. So here's my loadout with the new items. So, primary weapon, first one here, the Gladiator, fires a charged round that sticks to walls and releases multiple shockwaves, detonates instantly in a focus blast if it actually hits the enemy. So, this thing hits about as hard as a heavy spin fuser, and it is also sticky, essentially. That's the weird thing about it. It's sticky, but it detonates instantly when it hits a target. So, unlike the Arcsbuster or the Jackal, when you hit a target, it waits a little bit, then explodes, with no chance of getting it off you. This thing just bypasses all that and just explodes completely. So, it's a little bit weird. It's a bizarre hybrid weapon. I'm not even sure as to the purpose of that. It doesn't explode near a target. You've got to hit them dead on with it, just like you would in midair with, say, a spin fuser. When this lands on the ground, it pulses 3 times after a few seconds, and each of those pulses gets larger, but depending on which pulse you get hit by, it does less damage. The largest pulse deals the least damage. So it's like an Arcbuster, but you only fire 1 bullet out of it. So the shell, the charge, hits, it then pulses 3 times. Second weapon's Plasma Cannon. This is just a big version of the plasma gun, really. The weird thing is that this is a secondary weapon. You'd kind of expect this to be a primary, but I suppose the risk is that if you made it a primary, it might just be better than the heavy spin fuser. So I guess that's why they put it there. But the weird thing is it doesn't kind of fulfill the same roles as the automatic shotgun and the Nova Colt. The plasma gun is really not very good for finishing people off, I feel, versus the Nova Colt. It's much, much easier to hit someone with a Nova Colt than it is with a plasma gun. This is kind of a primary dueling weapon. So the combination of the Plasma Cannon and the Gladiator is a little bit weird. Almost to the point where I feel like you should not equip both. Like, if I were to equip the Gladiator, I'd probably then equip the Nova Colt, if I'm totally honest. You're pretty good indoors with both of these, though, I suppose. The Plasma Cannon is good indoors. It's still good in outdoor duels, but it's got the same problem the Plasma Gun does, in the fact that it's slow. Like, the projectile is quite slow, it makes it a little bit more difficult to aim. In heavy-on-heavy fights, in close quarters, it's fantastic. But if you're trying to chase anyone down, or nail someone from a distance, not a chance. You just can't do it, with either the Gladiator or the Plasma Cannon. So, you become a short-range duelist, if you have both of these. Which I guess was kind of what they were aiming for with the Brute anyway, especially with the automatic shotgun. But, I don't know, I think I prefer the Nova Colt, if I'm honest. The Gladiator, I will happily use versus the heavy spin fuser. It pretty much does about the same kind of damage, but it has more utility. It's just a bit harder to use. In a dueling situation, it's not impossible to get mid-airs with this, and I have gotten mid-airs with this, as you will see in the footage. But I would still kind of rate the heavy spin fuser better for that in terms of blue plate specials, and for engaging at a slightly longer range, because of course it shoots in a straight line. Both kind of do about the same damage. Splash-wise, though, with the heavy spin fuser, indoors or indeed outdoors as well, if you fire this and you miss, you're still gonna get damage on the ground. Like, you can aim near somebody and do damage. But in a dueling situation, outdoors as opposed to indoors, that's something you cannot really do with the Gladiator. If you miss with the Gladiator while you're dueling outdoors, the chances are that the opponent is going to have moved before the Gladiator actually detonates. So the spin fuser is clearly better in that particular environment. But the Gladiator gains some utility in terms of indoor fighting for area denial, gen rooms in combination with fractal grenades, and flag assault. The actual flag stand can be attacked with this much more effectively than it would be with a heavy spin fuser. Yes, you can attack a flag stand with a fractal grenade as well, but it's shorter range, it's more difficult to actually get that to land. So you can fire this off at a longer distance, and you can hit a flag stand with it, and it's going to pulse, and that's going to be great for clearing defenses, and good for getting rid of heavy on flag to allow for your Kappa to come in and grab it. So it's a better all-round weapon, I think. in that regard, just a little bit more specialized when it comes to dueling, a little bit more difficult to do it with. You've got to be getting mid-airs with this thing in a duel if you want to be doing as much damage as you would otherwise do with a heavy spin fuser. Now, before we go on to the gameplay footage and to look at the other features, of which there aren't actually all that many in this update, I want to have a look at the new pack. This is the survival pack. It's very much a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none kind of thing. The energy pack gives you 35 energy, whereas the survival pack only gives you 15. It does, however, give you plus energy regen, which can potentially make up for that. It has a few problems. If you take the survival pack instead of the energy pack, you're going to be less mobile for very obvious reasons. You don't have as much jetpack capability. So that can cause you a few issues, but it does mean you can jetpack a little bit more often, just not quite as much. This is also going to be a problem if you decide to take the Gladiator, because you have essentially no disc jumping capability at all. You can't disc jump with the Gladiator, and if you then take the survival pack, my god, are you lacking mobility. So that can cause you problems. But what you do get with this is run speed. So this is useful in two areas. Firstly, indoors, obviously run speed is great. Secondly, in arenas where you're not supposed to be using skiing and jetpacking all that much. So run speed can give you an edge in that respect. You also get plus 200 health, which makes you the toughest class in the entire game. Although you can also argue that the shield pack would give you that anyway. The shield pack will let you soak up a hell of a lot of damage, both indoors and out. Admittedly, I'd use it more indoors because it does have a tendency of draining a hell of a lot of energy. If you end up taking a hit, then suddenly, whoa, your jetpack's gone. You can't do anything with it, so your mobility is severely compromised in that regard. So the survival pack is a weird one. It is nice to see that it's a bit of a side grade, though. It's like, hey, let's just take a bunch of different stats and give you boosts in it. And it does also reinforce the idea that the Brute is kind of like a heavy soldier. For instance, if you look at the utility pack for the soldier, it's essentially the same idea. Indeed, it even uses the same model. That gives you little bits of extra stuff, and that's exactly what the Brute does as well. Alright, so before we go into the gameplay, I just want to show you live streams. You can actually watch stuff from within the game now. It's not particularly well featured. It's just essentially a browser window that pops up borderless within the game, but it does work. There's no question about that. You can go and watch a stream. We can do that right now. There we go. Just brings up the Twitch window, and there you go. That is a stream going on right there. Not exactly good quality. We can go up to 720p if we want. There you go. I could just instantly watch a tribe stream without having to go to Twitch or anything like that. There you go. Not a great tribe stream, but not too shabby nonetheless. What you can also do is watch training videos, community videos. In fact, I've actually got some up there. My Tartarus update and my capture and hold update are available there. They will pop up in a little window for YouTube. Just essentially embeds it into the game. Eventually. For whatever reason, it's just taking too long. And then there are training videos as well. Incredibly helpful. Very helpful indeed. This is probably the best thing that they've put in so far in terms of teaching players not to suck. They still have some severe problems with tutorials, and I feel that they are slacking off on providing good information in-game and kind of offloading it to the community. And I don't feel that that's the best way to do things. You've also got this latest from Hi-Rez so that you can stay up to date on the updates. Okay. Let's have a look at some gameplay, shall we? Using the survival pack and the two new weapons. Alright, so one of the first things that people will most likely try and do is see, well, what does it do indoors? Because this class is already pretty damn good indoors as it is, with the heavy spin fuser, shield pack, and the wonders of the fractal grenade. Well, it's pretty damn awesome, honestly. You're good at it. The first thing that makes the Gladiator really good indoors is the obvious area denial effect. You can aim it at doors, you can do damage to people there. You can easily get airmails with it as well at close range. Obviously, it gets very hard to hit at longer ranges, but in a room of this size, that's not really an issue. You become this ultimate area denial machine, which is a good thing because, honestly, it's something that the Juggernaut was doing indoors anyway, and it really shouldn't have been, because the Juggernaut also has this great outdoor dominance, and the Brute, it was lacking in its role. That's why the Brute was one of the most unpopular classes. Like, what is it for? In this case, if you've got a Gladiator and a Plasma Gun, you are an absolute nightmare indoors. Admittedly, some might argue that it's worth actually taking the shield pack for this purpose instead of grabbing the survival pack. Because, like, yeah, okay, you got run speed, but in a generator room like this, it's kind of pointless. That said, sitting around and camping a generator room is not the most useful thing you can do by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah, kill the generator if you get the opportunity. Don't spend too much sodding time in there because, yes, it's a point farm, but you're not helping. You're really not. It's not a useful role. Killing the generator as part of the game, sitting in the generator farming points, that not so much. Not really. As you can see, the plasma cannon is very easy to use indoors. The gladiator is pretty good too, to the point where I think you could use either of them and you'd probably have a reasonable amount of success until eventually you're cut down by 5,000 people jumping into the generator room to get rid of you. More to the point, I'd like to see what these weapons actually do outside, and also explain why these things are side grades in comparison to the stuff that you've already got. So, the gladiator versus the heavy spin fuser does more damage on a direct hit. Will do more damage if you happen to be silly enough to sit in those 3 pulses that you can see right there. That's why it makes it a weird version of the Arcs Buster, because the Arcs Buster can do the same thing, but this does so in one shot, but it does so once after another, instead of doing it with 3 grenades that you can actually spread out. It will pulse wider each time, but do less damage. On direct hit, it's doing more damage, but anywhere away from your base, anywhere midfield, approach to base, things like that, you're going to be having problems using the gladiator, because a miss with the gladiator means a hell of a lot more than it does with the heavy spin fuser. You can miss if you're getting involved in ground play with the heavy spin fuser and still do splash damage. If you're doing any kind of ground play and you're not blue plating everything, which of course takes a lot of skill and is not necessarily reliable, then the gladiator does nothing otherwise, because it takes too long to detonate. When you hit the ground, it'll take a certain amount of time to start detonating. As you can see right there, it hits the ground, will do the pulse, and you're going to get nothing out of it. There you go. Because the guy that you're attacking, unless he's an idiot and is standing still, in which case you can kill him with harsh language, is already going to be out of range of that. Whereas with the heavy spin fuser, the splash damage occurs instantly. So I still call the heavy spin fuser a more reliable weapon in outdoor combat. However, this weapon does have potential for the skilled player in arenas and in close range. In close quarters, getting a direct hit with this in midair is not as hard by any stretch of the imagination. The plasma gun also works for this. If you're at a slightly longer range where you feel, right, well, getting a hit here is going to be a lot more difficult, then the plasma gun is a bit more forgiving. But if you get outside of that range at all, neither of the weapons are useful. In comparison, heavy spin fuser are much easier to use at longer ranges due to projectile speed, the way that a spin fuser flies in a straight line as opposed to in an awkward arc. And even if you're aiming at someone far away, if you aim towards them on the ground and you lead the target, you can still actually hit them. Can't do that with the gladiator. Plasma, projectile is too slow to be used at long ranges, if I'm totally honest. You can shell an area with it, but once again, that involves a stationary enemy on the ground. Not so much of a big deal. Now, here's a use for the gladiator which I really like, because it does give the brute a bit of flexibility in terms of a raider style of role. You can fire this at the flag stand, and if you do it, it's great for killing heavy on flag. It's also great for clearing out mines, does good damage to force fields and things like that. So you can fire it at a flag stand, it's going to sit there and be an area denial weapon. Again, you can do it with a fractal, but the problem with the fractal is it takes a bit of time to detonate, and it's a little bit more difficult to hit with. It's got a shorter range. You can fire this in an arc further away from the flag stand on approach, and have it clear the flag stand in the process, so you don't have to get too close to those nasty defenses. You can see how effective the weapon is for killing people that try to hide inside the tower on Rain Dance. You just fire one of those in there, the entire room just explodes. And that's also quite useful. There are some areas where you will have these little indoor parts that aren't actually part of the main base. People may decide to try and take refuge in them. That's a good way to clean them out. Once again, these weapons kind of cement the Brute's role when it comes to room clearing. They are second to none in that regard now, I would honestly say. They were pretty good before. They're even better now. I would say the Juggernauts had some amazing room clearing abilities, but the amount of different kinds of room clearing that you've got with the Brute, as well as the additional durability with something like the shield pack, does make you an absolute monster for dueling indoors, and it's pretty good outdoors too. Alright, let's look at the Gladiator's viability as an outdoor dueling weapon and the kind of environments you're going to have to get into in order to make it work. If you have the skill and you get into a good situation for it, this thing does immense damage. Like that. Yeah? If you can learn to hit at that kind of range, you will be absolutely fantastic. And then if you need a finisher that's a little bit easier, the plasma cannon gives you that ability. Once again, though, you have to stay within short to medium range to make that work, and it doesn't give you chasing abilities, but you can destroy with this thing if you happen to know what you're doing. This makes it a very good capture and hold weapon, in my opinion, where things are much closer quarters than you would expect to see in Capture the Flag, and also good for arenas as well. I feel that skilled players will be able to do immense damage with this thing, and because it does slightly more than the heavy spin fuser, it's got a good refire rate, it's kind of a nice arc if you get practiced with it, and it has that additional area denial capability. I think that some people will end up preferring it in that regard. But it does take quite a bit of effort. Those of you who are used to getting airmails with a thumper midair are most likely going to be able to handle using a gun like this without too much of a problem. But as you can very clearly see there, the miss is punished far more than any other explosive weapon, by far. It punishes you more than the spin fuser, a thumper, and of course a plasma gun. Plasma gun has the higher refire rate, and it does have a little bit of splash, though not as good as the spin fuser. The Gladiator is just flat out useless if you miss with it, though. It really is. So in that case, you want to flick over to the plasma cannon, and that kind of thing can happen. Could have done that with a Gladiator as well, but that guy was pretty weak, so the refire rate gives me that additional margin for error with this gun. Honestly, I feel like this is the first time that we've seen a set of weapons come in an update where things haven't been obviously overpowered. The plasma cannon doesn't feel as ridiculous as the plasma gun did on launch because, of course, it doesn't have the ridiculous hitbox that the projectile used to have. The plasma gun is still banned in competitive play, according to spinfuser.org, if I recall correctly. So I am not 100% sure if the same thing would end up applying there to the plasma cannon on the Brute. But the argument could be made that for the Raider, the combination of the SMG and the plasma gun is just too much, because you've got the ability to quickly finish people off with that automatic weapon there. Whereas here, you don't have that. You don't have the quick ability to finish people off, and the strategy to fight against the Gladiator plasma cannon combo is obviously to extend the range between you and your opponent. You don't want to get in close quarters with the Brute. You never have, and these weapons really do make that blindingly obvious, but in this case, you really want to think, okay, he's got a Gladiator plasma cannon, I want to be engaging him at a much larger range, because he has no real way to hit me outside of his optimum range with those two guns. He just cannot do it. It's a pretty major trade-off not to have the Nova Colt or the heavy spin fuser. Also, remember that spin fusers can be used to gain mobility, and that's a fairly important role in and of itself. So, Brute is lacking outdoor mobility as a result. But in that kind of range, you're monstrous. I'm fighting against another Brute here who's most likely a little bit better than I am, so that's a bit of a problem. But 2 hits with that is going to take him down pretty low, and then he could try and finish him off with the plasma cannon, but at that range, it's difficult. I've got to try and close the distance once again, which against another Brute can be pretty dangerous. But the amount of damage you can do closer, much, much better. So I feel like you've got a nice new role here for the Brute, this close-range brawler. And if you decide not to have these guns, and you just have the heavy spin fuser and the Colt, then you're just as effective, just in a slightly different kind of way, which is obviously much, much better than some of the weapon upgrades we've seen previously, where the Jackal is just flat out better than any of the other guns that the Inf had, and arguably still is, and then the plasma gun is just flat out better when it comes to straight-up dueling. It's not better than the Arcs Buster and the Grenade Launcher, because they have different roles, but the problem with the plasma gun is that it makes the Raider just a better soldier in general. It's just flat out better than the Soldier Spin Fuser, and it kind of negates the role of the Soldier. Whereas here, no, you don't really have that. It's not negating the roles of other heavy classes, and that's most assuredly a good thing as far as I'm concerned. Once again, Hi-Rez is still having issues with their pricing. I feel that the guns cost too much, both in XP and in gold, and that really punishes people unnecessarily. But at least at this time, you can't say that the Gladiator is an essential part of the Brute kit, and the weapons that you get by default are still pretty damn solid. My name's been Totalbiscuit, taking a look at the update Staying Alive for Tribes Ascend. I'll see you next time.